All right, really, really happy to be sitting down with Stacey Lemmer. Stacey is the co-director out at Simpson University of their clinical psychology and counseling program. She's also a clinical psychologist here at the Transformation Center at Bethel. And just really excited to sit down with you, Stacey. Thank you. How's your day going? It's good to see you.
Oh, Lance, it's great to be with you. My day's going great. I'm excited to be able to have some good conversation and meet some people where they're at today.
Nice. Yeah, we have been in this deep dive around what we've generalized as responsible leadership. And we're just talking around or into a really big subject. Like as a leader in the church, a pastoral leader, it's just so common to brush up against, come into the dynamic where people have been quote unquote hurt by leadership relationships, or they're dealing with some form of wounding there. Yeah. And every relationship or every interview that we've done with leaders, it's like, hey, this isn't a rarity. This happens. It's very commonplace. And so the idea is in these conversations to learn, unpack what happens there. And hopefully the goal is to be empowering both towards leaders and followers, like, and recognize everybody's playing their part in this beautiful mess of life and doing relationships well. And so that's why we brought Stacey in as a counselor, psychologist, somebody who's got that in her background. How would you speak to this really big idea just initially? You know, this big idea of, hey, people get hurt in a leadership follower type relationship, or maybe more directly put, what do you come across? What do you see in your work? Like, is this something that you see pretty common, or is it more of a rarity?
Yeah, Lance, I wish it was a rarity. I do see it quite often. I would say a third to a half of individuals that I work with have woundings or difficult experiences with leadership that's been unhealthy.
Yeah.
I would say an equal amount might be those that have maybe projected unhealthy things onto leaders out of their own woundedness, and kind of projecting things that have occurred in their life, and maybe unfairly judging leaders, and so there's a real mixed gamut of both, of those that are being led, having many of their trigger points activated in relationship with those that are in leadership, as well as leaders who are unhealthy and even toxic, doing things and really more psychological and emotional abuse to those that they're leading, or those that they're helping.
Yeah. And if you're okay with that, why don't we start there with the leadership side? So when you're recognizing toxic leadership, things that are unhealthy, whether we would call that spiritual abuse or whether we would call that power or control, whatever, what is at play there? Maybe you've sat with leaders that have asked for help in their leadership, like, hey, I'm not being effective as a leader, I'm hurting people.
Right.
What do you recognize is at play there? What are some of the drivers and motivators that perpetuate that unhealth and that problem?
Right. It is, Lance, I've sat with a lot of leaders and who really desire to be good leaders, to operate out of love, to be able to build and encourage and empower and equip those that are following them or that they're leading. Yet many times what's at play is a very foundational motivator of fear.
Okay.
And that fear tends to, and it's kind of different per situation, but that fear tends to come from a more fragile sense of self.
Yeah.
Now, all of us can enter in and out of that. We all can have times where we feel inadequate, or times that we feel like we don't have what it takes to do whatever it is that God's calling us into. But this is a different fragility that I tend to see in leaders that are fear-based and tend to end up, their actions tend to become a vacuum toward self.
Okay.
And almost managing image, managing a fear of loss regarding things that would look poorly upon themselves, or a fear of loss in what they're building because what it would mean to them.
Yeah.
So it tends to be a self focus
Yep.
in regard to Well, and even if you think about the broadness of all of us at times experiencing, feeling inadequate and going, oh my goodness, Lord, you're calling me to something you know, we have a choice in those moments where we go, okay, this is beyond me. This is, I'm feeling like God, this is stretching. We have a choice of where we're going to access power.
Mm,
Because we are feeling powerless in a healthy way sometimes. And then another way, it could be much more fragile sense of powerlessness. And God wants us to pull on his source of power through the Holy Spirit to say, okay, I'm going to connect in as a son or daughter, and I'm going to access the inheritance that God's given us, that God's given me. And I'm going to do the things that are in God's heart to do. I'm going to build his kingdom through his power, not by our strength, but by his power. When individuals are having difficulties in accessing God's power, or having areas of woundedness that cause that fragility to be so distressing and so fear-based, they tend to pull on any power that they can manage in order to secure that sense of self. If that makes sense. I don't want to go too deep too quickly, but that sense. So the power that they're pulling on could be manipulation, control, being able to have more fear-based tactics in order to stabilize what it is inside of them that's really afraid. And
that's great. Wow, it's so
I could go more,
profound.
but
So profound. So somebody that is in that state of looking to bring shift and change to the way they lead. So one, like, check your power source. Is there anything else you would add that would be helpful towards that shift being realized, maybe coming into a more healthy place?
Yes, I'll answer so many things. I would say that healthy leaders have a good source of accountability as well. Accountability in the sense that, well, and I can tell you from the perspective of those that I've worked with that have felt like they didn't have an opportunity to address leaders who have been unhealthy with them. Many times it's a mixed bag with unhealthy leaders. And those that are being led or following might see charisma and vision and risk-taking and let's do this big thing. And especially during times that are unstable and times of transition, individuals are more open to that type of leadership because they want someone that's powerful and strong, that's directing them in a path that seems sure. But in that mixed bag, there's also things where truth begins to be twisted in order to meet the need of any situation. There might be manipulation, things that are incongruent. They might have angry outbursts and be very critical or demeaning of individuals that are following them or working with them more closely. So lots of incongruencies that often the follower will say, did I just really hear that? That doesn't make sense. I have this belief in this person as a leader. And yet I'm seeing things that they're demonstrating that cause me to feel insecure or unsafe. And oftentimes those followers don't always have opportunity to follow up with their leaders, or they don't have others to go to that could potentially hold that leader accountable for things that the followers are seeing. Many times leaders in that situation, well, I won't say many times, it's mixed, but usually they're not going to be fully aware of the impact, the negative impact that they're having on those they're leading. They might, but those that I've seen in positions that are really doing harm typically aren't aware, or they don't have that sense of being able to observe themselves in a situation that's a little more clinical, but they can't always step back and go, what is the impact that I'm having on that person when I just, degraded them or, kind of lost my temper with them or worse. And so it's imperative that they have an accountability structure, and that even structures that are empowering leaders put that into place so that we're not enabling unhealthy leadership. That would include people that are over everyone, someone that is even at a peer level or at a higher level, those that can periodically on a consistent basis do an evaluation, gather information from those that are following, let them speak into, let those that are healthy accountability partners or accountability structures speak into the leader's life and challenge them and help them grow, help make sure that they're not acting out of wounds or fragility and really hurting others.
Great. Yeah, and hearing you talk, I mean, I do think of the other side of the coin when a follower or an employee or somebody that's running with you in a team context is maybe sending some of those vibes back up, like disrespect, or an inability to receive feedback. Like, let's talk about the other side of the coin. So when you mentioned this earlier, it's like, hey, unhealthy leaders, and then you also have a dynamic at play where people's maybe background or woundings comes into the relationship. So it's a two-sided equation at times, depends.
Right.
What do you speak to that side of the dynamic a bit? So somebody that maybe is carrying with them into a work environment or a working relationship some wounds, how does that play out? And all of a sudden we're starting to experience something that's unhealthy. I'll just leave it there, unhealthy.
Right. And it's, oh goodness, I always go back to how just as leaders before God, we're called to steward, we're given lives to steward and to mold. And you talked about the difference between influence and control. And I love that, because influencers will not cross the boundary of coerciveness or taking away that freedom of choice of an individual, but they're there to mold and influence and pour in and build into these lives that we've been entrusted with. But those lives that we've been entrusted with have pain and hurt, and typically, I don't want to go too much clinically, but typically those hurts are in relationship with parents growing up, or others that have been in positions of authority or control in their life, people that have felt unsafe. So those experiences that they've had in their life, when we're entrusted with them and we're wanting to pour into them, they can start to project those fears, those attachment styles, those types of woundedness and lack of trust onto us. And it's really up to us to be able to discern where that follower is and to be able to speak to them and to use tact. Tact sounds like manners, but tact is really, how am I going to communicate with this person in order to best make contact? How am I going to talk with them or discern what's going on and influence and mold in such a way that's truly going to hit where they need at the moment. Sometimes that's possible, and other times it's not. Those accountability structures that are in place definitely need to be people who are well educated in some of this, so that they know when individuals go to them where is the true accountability falling? Is it with that person? Is it with the leader? And we are in the messy mix of all of that as leaders and those being led, and being able to sort out and discern where people are and to be able to meet them accordingly is a critical key, as well as knowing that when individuals are behaving badly, when it's unhealthy, when they're being disrespectful, when they're starting to manifest these things that come from wounding in their own life, it's easy to react and to become in a state of threat ourselves. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're bad leaders. We're just getting threatened. We're getting activated. We're getting triggered. Things in our own life might be coming to the surface, and we really want to mitigate that through the love of Christ, being sure that we're de-escalating before we respond, that we're keeping a wise mind instead of being in an emotional state and reacting and ending up doing more damage to those individuals. Because sometimes if there's been trauma, they might even be reenacting trauma with the leader, unbeknownst to them oftentimes. And we don't want to step into that scenario unknowingly. We want to be sure that we're really being those that are careful in our reactions and our responses, even to those that are behaving in really triggering ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what we want to unpack with you and your background and your experience. And you keep referencing, I don't want to go too clinical. I think it's fine to go really clinical. I
Okay.
think like we do want to unpack the like two-sided nature of this equation. I think when we led into this big subject, we were really thinking about like, wow, power and control dynamics are so at play
Mhm.
so often. I was kind of surprised by that. But now as I'm going deeper into the subject, it's like, well, it's not just about power and control. It's also about people's woundings and people's abilities to navigate, just the messiness of relationships. And somehow when someone's in a position of authority in someone's life, it gets even more messy, or there's other lenses at play. But I've just seen, that this isn't my first rodeo. It's always a two-way street. It's always about both parties. It's not just a leader or just a follower. So what would you say when someone's attempting to do feedback and they're in something that feels unhealthy? You use the word toxic, whether it's follower to leader, leader to follower. What would you say is a healthy process of trying to unravel the mess? We would talk about feedback loops, and in our environment as a leader, I feel very responsible to, at times, I don't know how often I do it. I certainly don't do it enough, just to stop and say, hey, how are you experiencing me as a leader? And that there's an opportunity for like, okay, so there's some opportunity for some feedback. And then hopefully I'm actually listening to that feedback. Now I'm coming at this from a leader, but when I'm pursuing a follower who I'd also like, hey, we need to approach some feedback your way. Here's how I'm experiencing you. I guess what I'm getting towards is when we hit impasse, like what do we do when the process of feedback is kind of going nowhere? It's feeling very lopsided. Like maybe one person's telling the other person, no, it's all on you. And obviously it's like, wow, we're not getting anywhere when someone's telling another person, this is all your fault. Like there has to be, is it just as simple as let's get a mediator involved?
Yeah. I think what you're talking about, Lance, in those impasses are, that they're self-protections and defense mechanisms. And depending on the severity of what we're dealing with in either leader or those being led, those defenses and those self-protections are ways to self-preserve. They can go deep, they can run deep. And it's important, I think, if I'm coming from leader to leader to those being led, if I'm speaking into leaders, I would say if you're feeling like you're in an impasse, to mirror, to point out process rather than content.
Nice.
To be able to say, to mirror back what you're experiencing in a respectful and honoring way. I mean, those are lives that we're being entrusted with. We want to really do our best to seek their best. And so mirroring back and saying, when I'm bringing this feedback to you, I feel like I'm hitting up against a wall, or I feel like it's not being heard. Is that your experience? I like to add that, to add or subtract to what I'm mirroring back. Help me understand, having a posture of humility of your heart, being able to say, I want to make sure I'm understanding, I'm opening conversation, I'm not judging or evaluating or labeling you, but I am giving you feedback on your process, because the process is going to be more important than the content at that point. The content could vary, but the process of that self-protection, or the walls, or the accusations that are coming, will give you, it's almost like smoke for them that's going to lead back to a fire in their past, or in currently, it might be something, it's usually going back to the past if it's that strong. And being able to invite them into a healing process at some point along the line, hopefully inviting them into a healing process where you get to be an agent of being a corrective experience with them. I mean, that's huge. That's a huge thing when we actually can invite someone into when when you're at that impasse, if they can hear, if there is a potential for a mediator to step in, and they're invited into a corrective, emotional, healing, spiritual, body, soul, spirit, whatever is involved, healing. That's what we want for those that we're leading, and to encounter the Spirit of God through us, and through that process.
Yeah, and you're starting to get into that really large territory of trust and vulnerability. I think when feedback is opening up vulnerability and trust is developing, healing can happen. When the feedback process is more closing vulnerability down, and there's an inability for an individual to feel safe, heard, again, whether it's leader or follower, somebody is not reciprocating with, hey, we're safe now. Hard for that shift to take place without trust. Is that an accurate statement?
Absolutely. And I think safety is a key word. That emotional safety is key. And it's usually what's been destroyed in those areas of woundedness, and then hence the self-protection has to come, because if individuals have repeatedly felt unsafe, they're not necessarily going to automatically feel unsafe, or even no matter what kind of tact or presence you're using, those walls, or even things that they've been partnering with, if it's, accusation or blame, or even, many times an individual who's been through that has questioned and blamed themselves so much as well, that they might have a lot of self-doubt in the midst of having dealt with you.
Yeah.
So there's real potential, tenderness underneath of that lack of safety.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about different relationships over the years, leadership settings, places where I've been in a position of responsibility or leadership with someone, and the ability to, extend grace and like, hey, it's okay. Let's just take some time. You're not doing well, so it's okay. It's not like, hey, you have permission to not show up, but there's a different level of like permission to be unplugged, and let's take a break because you're obviously going through something. And then to another end of a gamut where there have been, I don't know, so many explosive interactions where it's like, I don't really know what to do now besides have a really strong boundary. Like, we just have to have a boundary so that we can maintain respect, right? And again, we're talking about a gamut, like, it's because these are humans. It's not like this science. I mean, I know there's science involved, but
right. And I think some things I might say could go, again, either leader or follower, leader or those being led, where you have to validate your experience.
wow.
Which is when you're in a situation where you're actually feeling very much like it's incongruent. Like, I know this person in one setting, and in another setting, they're attacking me, or I know their character here. When there's incongruency in a mixed bag, it's a little crazy making, in the sense, it's like, I believe in this person, I know who they are, I know they have all this gold inside of them, but over here, whoa, what is happening? Is this fitting? It's almost like a dissonance that starts to develop inside of us. Now, this is those being led or leaders, because those being led, that's probably one of the key sources of anxiety and panic and other things that tend to ensue from that emotional and the emotional or psychological abuse that can occur from an unhealthy leader is they believe in who that leader is. They've seen them in public or in other places, and they want to follow them, but then they have this abusive experience.
Sure.
And so that can go in either direction, if you follow me, in that, either the leader or those being followed. So one thing that's very important is to connect with yourself with compassion, and to know what's true for you. And to maybe even have a person that you trust that's going to be a little bit more objective, maybe even out of your wheelhouse, to talk to about that, and to say, hey, I just need a sounding board. I need an objective sounding board. you know, as if you're the only one sharing, it might not be fully objective, but at least being able to go and say, hey, just tell
Yeah.
me if there's something you see in me, if I'm perceiving this wrong. But if you know that your experience is true in the
Yeah.
sense of you know, you're not deceived or skewed in some kind of way, to be able to validate that and to say,
Yeah.
okay, I know what I know that I'm experiencing, and then to be able to draw boundaries accordingly.
Yeah.
And to be able to know, okay, I might not reveal I'm going to be selective about what I reveal. I'm going to boundary my encounters and make sure another person is with me. Or
Right.
I'm going to, you know, just be more intentional about my interactions with that person in order to both guard against maybe receiving accusation or, you know, unhealthy behaviors,
Yeah.
as well as making sure this person is in a space that they're not invited into that, you
Yeah.
know, and that they're able to begin to have feedback in a healthy way.
Yeah.
With those boundaries as well is kind of a resolve in some ways at some times that you're not this person, you're not responsible for this person's healing, that you're not responsible for them being fully healthy again. Um, that's where we tend to get into codependency,
Yeah.
where an individual, and this can be a follower or a leader. You know,
Yeah.
many leaders are in positions because they have a heart to care and to heal and to bring protection and you know, wholeness and see people thrive. And yet there's a space in which we can't be responsible for that. We need to be responsible for how we're influencing and leading, but
Yeah.
we have to put them in the hands of God. And to know that if this person, if they are not receiving breakthrough with me, I'm going to do everything on my end of the street to check and see where I'm at, but I might have to release them in the sense that I'm not carrying this burden of why can't I help? Why isn't this working? It
Yeah.
might be something that maybe you're sowing seeds into their life. It might be a season where you are speaking some things or mirroring back process, which can be huge for an individual.
Yeah.
Rather than getting in the spider web of the content, somebody that just mirrors back process while still dignifying them and ascribing worth to them and giving them a safe place to hear that, that can be huge in and of itself.
Yeah.
So knowing that you might have to resign the fact that you're going to help them. And that could be even follower to leader. Those that are in closer inner circles with leaders that are unhealthy often have a lot of spiritual and emotional abuse, but they believe in that leader and they think, I'm going to stay loyal, I'm going
Okay.
to stay true, I'm going to see what I can do in order to see this person through healing. And that capacity for them to heal may not be there for a number of different reasons, whether
Yeah.
that be
Yeah.
deeper
Can
seated
you,
traits.
wow, this is gold. Just amazing stuff. Can you talk to the dynamic of impasse? Like what happens when, you know, you've done your best to work it through, to
Mhm.
seek feedback, to communicate in a like a non-controlling way, non-manipulative way. You're just like, here's my experience. And you're actually seeking to get into a healthy place, whether you're a follower or leader, but you know, the number of attempts, it's not working for whatever reason.
Mhm. Mhm.
Maybe disrespect has become so normative that it's like there's no way accept disrespect. All of a sudden, the only way feels like people are being heard is there's like
Mhm.
voices being raised, or
Mhm.
I don't know. There could be a number of incidences, but it's like, hey, we are not really seeing eye to eye. This doesn't seem to be going forward. We've
Okay.
brought in mediators. We've attempted the feedback process.
Okay. Yeah.
What would you say there?
Um,
Again, to follower or leader about like, hey, here's maybe some steps for you to take or some things to consider pursuing.
right. You know, what I would maybe call in the clinical field terminating a relationship, you know, in
Okay.
regard to the goodness of fit is not there between
Yeah.
a people helper or a people leader and those that are following. That goodness of fit for whatever reason is not there.
Yeah.
And in that process, we don't end well often in our world, you know, and to provide, I think the top priority as a leader or a follower, but I think more intentionally as a leader is to provide a good ending.
It's good.
where they feel, I almost want to use that word again, dignified. They feel
Ah,
dignified. You're
I
not
like that.
placing shame or blame on them, where they're going to walk away feeling like another failure has occurred.
Yeah,
But that you're going to still call out those things that you see in them, and to, as well, in an honest way, talk about the lack of goodness of fit, what dynamics were there, and
yeah,
maybe even say, this lack of goodness of fit, these places where we were either being triggered or not being able to cooperate or connect, that it's suggesting that that's an area. Well, I would maybe as a leader almost go to myself first and say, this is
sure.
something I want to look into, almost demonstrating vulnerability, and say, this is something I want to look into on my end, and make sure that I'm healthy and addressing these things. And I encourage you to do the same. Maybe seek someone, a trusted other, elder, a professional that could help you work through, where this smoke might be coming from,
Yeah,
areas of woundedness that maybe this is coming up in your life for a reason. Maybe this
sure.
is coming up in my life for a reason. Maybe it's, coming to the surface because God desires to do something really special in the midst of this and redeem what it is that feels like has been so difficult to walk through.
I love that. Like providing a dignified ending to the relationship. That's great. And that does feel like the responsibility of the leader,
Yeah,
for sure.
where it's not as much with the follower, I would say.
Yeah,
I'll put it in that terms, because Lance, you are an amazing leader. I know you a little, and I admire your leadership in the sense that I think that you go the extra mile to consider where people are at and to be caring. But I will say, not in my travels and speaking in ministry and things, that's not, some people are encountering really toxic leaders,
yeah,
even traits of narcissism and other kinds
yeah,
of things where there's a real lack of empathy. There's a capacity issue where that person isn't able to be compassionate and is
yeah,
much more self-centered. And if there is a relationship going on from a leader to someone being led, and
yeah,
I know that there's probably listeners out there that have experienced this,
yeah,
where you've done your best to end well or to draw boundaries. Well, rather, you've done your best to draw boundaries and you want to end well, but there may not be a well ending. There
yeah.
may, usually if you're trying to draw boundaries with someone who's exploiting or using you for their own purposes,
Mm,
it may not go well. Those boundaries are never going to feel good to those that you draw it with.
yeah,
And it may be that you need to do everything you can to be at peace,
yeah,
with that person, and to leave the rest in God's hands, because that can be the case. And I don't want to set someone up for feeling like, as a follower, they need to end well, because that's really, in that situation, not their full responsibility. And if the person that's leading doesn't have that capacity, they need to know when to allow that cut to occur, and for them to entrust God with that person. And it's interesting, Lance. One of the things that I hear from those that have been abused or hurt in toxic leadership experiences, that person has never had the feedback or accountability, or they've never received it. I have now let the situation be cut off, and I'm over here healing, but they're still doing what they're doing to others.
yeah,
And they're not being held accountable. And I see them, they've had inside information, and experiences, and that leader isn't stopped. And
sure.
that's super disturbing.
Yeah,
And it sets, once they get out of the kind of crazy making of that, of like, did I really perceive that? Is this experience, did I actually feel this way or have this experience? Or, we can get into all measures of abuse. But that's a place where healing needs to occur in that individual, and they can go through. And I even think, in a corporate way, this is a responsibility of organizations, that we have to set up structures that do not empower toxic leaders,
yeah,
or that create a group think in which that leader is insulated from critical thought or experiences that are going to
yeah,
challenge them, and to be able to know that there are those individuals that that those being led can go to in order to just share that they are going to be wise counsel and not just hear and bring the hammer on the leader or hear and bring the hammer on the follower,
Yeah.
but creating structures where that person, in their lack of ending well, has that accountability.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's this dynamic when feedback is coming either way, towards a leader, towards a follower. I don't really like that word. It's a team member, a team member, because follower sounds like robots or something. It's like everybody's powerful.
Yeah.
Team member, whether it's
and-
team member or leader,
Yeah.
I think there's that. It sounds to me like the fulcrum upon which this whole thing rests is like, can you listen? And how responsive are you to someone's feedback? Can you actually let it in and assess and assimilate and actually try to be influenced by that feedback? And I think that feedback can also be, a very subjective process. And maybe at times the inability to listen is an indicator of we need a mediator. Like we need someone else to be involved in this feedback loop.
Yes.
Because I think I've experienced that enough as a leader that, again, it's a two-way street.
Absolutely.
When the feedback is flowing and people are like, nope, it's like, shoot, okay, whether it's the leader or the team member, this nope. Oh man, we're like, what are we going to do about this? Because that nope is essentially like we don't have trust anymore. We really can't.
Stonewalling. Yeah.
We can't really be influencing each other, because influence, again, that flows both ways. I mean, my team members have a load of influence on me, and hopefully I have influence on them. And
well, that nope is a defense mechanism called stonewalling. That stonewalling is stonewalling is similar to cutoff in relationships where it's, nope, I'm not gonna go there. I can't go there. And usually I can't go there because something behind is too threatening. Whether it be looking at myself or the potential of opening up into a disappointing situation where I believed in someone and they aren't able to really meet the need that's there. It's that nope has a lot of things underneath, and it's one of those things that when you see it, to be able in your own mind as a leader to accurately perceive what that is. It feels very, it's a hard boundary. It's a wall. It's a nope. And that seems, it's jarring. But there's so much of a sense of threat behind that person may not be able to go there, or needs someone that is going to bring them a sense of safety as a mediator. I think a key for a mediator is someone who is outside of, someone who can be objective and would be perceived by that person as not a yes man or a yes woman that could be involved in a system that's seeking to empower a leader and protect a leader or insulate that leader. Having that person be someone that could be very trusted in the sense of keeping an objective, open mind to discern really what's going on in the situation.
Yeah, I love that point about stonewalling, that it's not just somebody shutting someone down. It's like they're actually feeling so threatened, and there's so much at stake for them that they're like, I don't know how to handle this. And so maybe if you're experiencing that either way, leader to team member, to understand, okay, I get it that you're in a really tight spot. I understand that some things are at stake right now that feel really threatening to you, but I'd really like to try to communicate with you. And my goal in communicating is bringing resolve. Again, I think like when it's over and over and over and over in a professional context, there becomes a setting of like, okay, it feels appropriate to move on from each other. And again, how do we provide a dignified ending to the relationship? I love that.
Yeah, for sure. Because you
that.
might be a piece of a journey and they might be a piece of your journey. And it doesn't always have to and the way that you really in your heart want it to. And you might have to entrust them. You will have to entrust them to God to continue their process
Yeah, I
as
love
they
that.
move forward.
I love that. The other thing that's in my mind, because you're speaking into it, I think there might be some more to unpack there
Mhm.
for the leader that maybe does have a sense of compassion, empathy. They really do care about those that they're working with. They want to see the best for them. You made a statement earlier. It's like, you have to realize, hey, you're not responsible for their healing. Can you talk a little bit about that? I do think that is a dynamic at play sometimes,
Mm.
where maybe this is also being a spiritual leader. Like when you're in a spiritual leader position, things get a little bit different. Like
I know.
there's other things at stake. It's like you're talking about people's soul, and I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I
We really
have
take it
found
on, you know.
I have found myself feeling, honestly, I'm I'm in a relationship with a therapist right now, and we just got to the bottom of like, oh, you actually feel responsible for them. And I was like, yeah, I do. I thought that was good, but it's not good to the degree that, like, no, I'm not. I'm actually not responsible for them. Like they
Mhm,
still have
mhm.
their life. And I don't
Yeah.
know, can you talk to that a little bit?
Oh, that's such a deep wide for people helpers everywhere. So those are leaders everywhere. You know, we're called into this by God because we have a desire to make an impact that creates change and brings healing and
Yeah.
wholeness and restoration and to protect and all the rest. And it's interesting because in the body of Christ, I love how God has so uniquely caused us to be interdependent. You know, in the body, he says the eye can't say to the toe, I have no need of you. You know, so we need one another where we can't, God hasn't designed, he's designed relationship at the heart of who he is.
Yeah.
And yet in the middle of that need, um, it's we have to there's a fine line between codependency
Yeah.
and interdependency.
Yeah.
And for those of us, and codependency is used to be a huge buzzword when I was being trained 20 years ago. You know, it's like codependency. Oh my goodness, I'm codependent in different areas, and it's really good to get yourself familiar with what codependency is and what that looks like, because it is that sense of taking responsibility where you're not supposed to take responsibility, where that's
Yeah.
not your role. You're
Yeah.
stepping in order to rescue or save or cover or
Wow.
in any sort of way. You know, it's this sense of I need to make sure you're okay for me to be okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that's huge, you know. And then in the middle of that, we have the body of Christ and this beautiful design of God that says, if when you're not okay, I'm going to grieve. When you're going through something, I want to come alongside and help you through that. And so there's this fine line in there. And I think the fruit testing of that needs to occur individually and potentially with a therapist. You know, if that's something, if over responsibility or feeling responsible for someone, where does that come from? Has that
Mhm.
been wired into us at an early age? Has that been, are we just that, do we have personality traits that, you know, lend itself that we step into that easily? And how do we begin to balance ourselves and safeguard ourselves and understand where we end and another person begins?
It's good.
Yeah. And this idea of freedom of choice, it's been on my mind so much, Lance. I think I have something to write on it and I'm not quite sure. I haven't solidified all my thoughts, but that ability to bring healing to a person's will, because a will is a part of the soul, the mind and the emotions and the will. Okay, so if you think about our decision maker, it's the one that's acting out when they're stonewalling. It's the one that's able to make choices. It's the choices of the leader to help or when to distance. You know, this idea of freedom of choice came from God's love.
Mm.
And it's for us to choose love, but not a love that impinges or begins to be coercive
Mm.
into another person's choice.
Absolutely.
That makes sense. So we
Oh,
can
yeah.
influence. But when we start to take on that responsibility of like, this is so important that I need to step over and overstretch over a person's will,
Wow.
that's when we get into more of this abusive, often subtle, then turning typically not so subtle, abusive kinds of patterns.
Wow, that's a big idea though. Like, because
Mm,
it's true for some of us, like the ability to make choices is really hampered. And so you're talking about healing someone's decision-making process and the ability, which really is be powerful and be
yes, yeah,
self-directed and
right. Well, and as we go back into being overly responsible
yeah,
in our own journeys, it's interesting to say, how have I been able to be powerful or not? Has
yeah,
my yes and no's been respected and honored? Have I been forced into situations to be responsible when inside that was not my role?
wow,
And what type of reinforcements, either punishments or rewards, were given when I stepped into that responsibility
yeah,
role? And so I can go on and on. Or there's those
good.
that have been in abusive situations that have been completely railroaded, where their yes and no's have been completely violated, and they are without a will. And often that's when you get that feedback, that stonewalling, or the kind of the bucking of the authority figure, because they feel like, you're going to take my will, I'm not safe, I'm going to be in danger, something bad's going to happen. And so their will, or their decision maker, starts really acting out in more protective, aggressive ways.
What's a healthy way to fix that right there?
Uh,
Someone's feeling
yeah,
infringed upon, their will is being manipulated.
yeah,
What would that team member do
right.
to address their leader? Let
I
them.
with a team member to address the leader. So that would be one being led to the leader. Again, I would mirror feedback, or excuse me, mirror process, of saying, my experience right now is that you're not honoring my boundary, or that you're not honoring my yes or no.
Yeah.
Can you help me understand what's important to you? That you're starting to step over that line. Being able,
Wow.
that can be a dicey conversation maybe, but being able to express that in some way that's going to be honoring, as well as, if it's the other way, if it's leader to those being led, I would say if you're there, if you have the capacity to make sure that they feel as if they're not, um,
Yeah.
which be a healthy leader, to be able to say, I want you to know that I respect your yes and no, and
Yeah.
that I'm going to do everything I can as we work as a team and we cooperate, for you to feel like you can be powerful, and that you can, be able to express your decisions and your thoughts in a way that are valued.
It's great.
Sometimes being able to affirm that can help de-escalate the situation, and can even be another one of those corrective experiences of like, oh, that person may have never had someone say that to them,
Yeah.
in the sense of, I'll honor your no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like the way we communicate in these tight spots, I mean, that's probably the gold. That's the feedback, or those are the tools that we need. So that statement you just made of like, can you tell me what's so important to you that you're not respecting my yes or my no? Yeah,
Mm.
that could feel threatening to a leader, but also a healthy leader can hear that feedback and be like,
You're like,
oh,
yeah,
oh wow, I didn't realize that's what I was doing. Let's unpack this a little bit. Let's talk. I want to, again, a healthy leader, I want to hear you.
yes.
Um,
Yes, because another trait of a healthy leader is that they're invested as equally, if not more, in the interests of those they're leading versus what they're trying to achieve.
yeah,
And it's this, we are seeking to achieve
yeah,
something, a goal that we have
yeah,
a vision for, and we're trying to, have everyone come together and go in that direction. But if those that we're pulling together toward that vision are being harmed, or their interests and their values and who they are and their worth, their sense of worth is being degraded or hurt, that's not okay.
yeah,
And that's when we have to stop and say, we're actually using individuals to meet this goal. And so to back up from that would be, I want to be sure I'm looking with discernment into who you are. What are your interests? Where is God growing you? And
Yeah,
putting them in that bus, in the right places so that those things can be facilitated while we go after this goal.
it's great. And I think one dynamic there could be, people's ability to advance. Are they in an environment where they can move, quote unquote, up the ladder? Not that that's a negative term, but I mean it positively, where people are developing, they're growing, they're advancing, and maybe they're in a situation where they're just unable to advance, or they're doing the same thing over and over again. And yeah, it's their job description. The mission exists. This is what we're doing as a team.
Yeah.
And maybe people are no longer stimulated by the work that they're doing. And it's like, I can think of a situation where it's like, cool, well, let's step back and look at your role. How can we make some adjustments so that you're doing things that bring you life? And yet, no matter how many adjustments are made, there's still this just underlying, like, they're not really happy in the role. They're not alive. They're not thriving. That could be at play too, huh?
It can be, and there can be various things underneath of that. It might be an emotional state. Maybe they're just surviving in their inner world, like as far as maybe they're just keeping their head above water, and that super impacts creativity and ability to thrive. So maybe it's something inside, to have a conversation and be sensitive to if there's anxiety or depression or shutdown or a sense of feeling overwhelmed, even if the information isn't, or even if the role is appropriate. Or it could be that that's just not a great fit. And this is, hey, you took a risk, you tried this role. Let's try another role for you and see what you think in another space and time, and kind of that pulling on that designing your life by the professors at Stanford. They have this great course that they take their students through. Undergrads definitely need, in particular, I think all of us, I revisit this myself, it's just trying different roles to say, what causes me to come alive, and getting feedback. And it's okay if a role doesn't fit. And it's okay if we find out what we're not, because that's part of our identity formation, is knowing what we're not, as well as who we are.
I love it. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, obviously a lot going on here.
Yes. Different dynamics. And, one thing, go ahead.
No, please. No, you go ahead, please.
Oh, I just am having this little thought when you were saying that, it really depends on how we communicate. And I would say even one step back from that is our heart posture, because out of our mouth, our words come from our heart, and our heart posture can be calloused. It can be, it can be varied in its motivations. It can, and I think as a leader or one being led, guarding our heart and being able to remain in a continual state of surrender to God, of just saying, focusing on our heart and making sure that we're surrendered. I'll just put it in those terms, in a way that is not my will, but your will, God. Tenderize my heart to what you're doing in this situation with this person. Tenderize my heart. Help me to be discerning and know what it is that's happening in this leader's life. If it's the time to bring feedback, or if I just, stay kind of present and supportive as long as abuse isn't happening, it's just, this heart posture is something I cannot reiterate enough. I think it's at the heart of who we are as Christians. It's at the heart of as we go out, and we want to go out with an overflow. And that overflow doesn't always look like nice and caring and supporting. It can be firm and challenging and other types of things. But as long as I think that's a good place to check, as well as adding communication to that. Because my fear, and what I have seen in some leaders that aren't toxic, is they get really good at communication, but that communication can become deceptive and cover up a heart that has other motivations and other things that are going on in it.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to, cultivate that in leaders as well.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm inserting here, but that what you're referring to there, that's like one-sided communication. That's like selfish, like they're communicating in a way that would benefit them, versus okay, I'm trying to broach a subject because of us, I want to focus on you and how you're doing. I want you to be thriving. We're in a situation where maybe we are not thriving in our working relationship. Let's try to get some health, but that's obviously not one-sided. That's not just about me
Right.
doing okay. Yeah, I love that you bring that up. And I love that you're drawing that emphasis of heart posture, because I think that's ultimately what's at stake here. Like people becoming jaded or people remaining tenderhearted and hopeful and being able to have trust and being able to live in a healthy way, vulnerably, trust giving,
Right.
eliciting trust from others. But when that's lost, when the heart posture kind of fades more towards stony, calloused, it's like,
Which can happen to all of us.
oh man, I mean, we're one bad encounter away from that, some of us, you know.
Yeah. And it's in that trust, it's like in that surrender, because trust, especially when I work with couples or families who've had betrayal, is super hard. And it's almost like we have to entrust ourselves to God as we open our lives to others. And in that sense, we can come out a little more less afraid, less less jaded, less protective. But we can say, God, you be the one that guards and protects. You be the one that gives me discernment and tells me how to navigate the situation, and not in an overly spiritual way, but just in that flow, that abiding connection that really produces good fruit.
I love it. Well, this has been really stimulating, super insightful. Like I'm getting a lot of wisdom just listening to you. I really appreciate you taking time. Is there any place people can find you if they'd like to follow you or get more connected to what you're doing?
Yes. Oh, thanks, Lance. Well, right now I have actually, I've been in the world of being a professor and helping train counselors as well as being a clinician, but I really feel the Lord telling me to be more creative and create some material that can reach more and fitting more people in my hours.
Yeah.
So I am in the midst of developing a website, Dr. Stacey, which is how I'm known in the community as far as my clinical work. And so maybe I'll just say, stay tuned on that.
Nice.
And I'll give you some feedback as far as a website that I can be located. But I'm definitely here at Simpson. I'm at the Transformation Center, and I can easily give you those information for people to reach out.
Yeah, beautiful. Wow, I can't wait for that website. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Let us know. Make sure you hit us up when it goes live. We'll definitely share that with on our platform. And so, Dr. Stacey Lemmer, thanks for being with us. What an awesome conversation. But yeah, thank you for what you're doing. You're obviously helping a lot of people. And hopefully this little moment was encouraging to you guys that have taken time, both as a leader, both as those that are taking part in team. I think, again, this idea of responsible leadership, this isn't a rarity, that tough stuff happens in our leadership relationships. Yeah. So I feel like what we're unpacking here it's useful info. So I hope it's been inspiring to you guys. And with that, we will say goodbye. Stacey, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you, everyone. Pleasure.
Okay, peace. We'll see you soon. Bye.